بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على المبعوث رحمة للعالمين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. أما بعد. Dear brothers and sisters in Islam, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And may Allah Azza wa Jal accept all our prayers and fasting during the month of Ramadan. And may Allah Azza wa Jal make us steadfast on worshipping Him as it pleases Him after the month of Ramadan. This is our 45th lesson of fiqh, and we have stopped for about 10 days, alhamdulillah, and we shall resume studying this beautiful book that teaches us in a beautiful way our beautiful religion, how to know the fiqh, to understand and comprehend Islamic Sharia law. You can find this book on www.islamicfiqh.net, and as usual you can follow our classes on Facebook page, the Islamic Fiqh. Today we are about to study quite an important chapter of fiqh, which a lot of the Muslims need and ask about. And this deals with marriage, the rulings of it, what governs it, what makes it valid or invalid, and what follows marriage, such as divorce, custody, allowance, etc., iddah, and so on. So this is quite an important topic that a lot of the Muslims often ask about, and inshallah we will try our level best to explain it and make it easy for Muslims to understand. So the Islamic terminology is known as nikah, and nikah means a marriage contract. And in the Qur'an, wherever this terminology is used, it is referring to the marriage contract, except in one location it refers to intercourse. And the marriage or the contract means, or the nikah means, a contract that permits an intimate sexual relationship between the man and wife in a legitimate way. So all contracts usually have something that they permit. A trade contract or a selling contract allows me to utilize the item that I had bought and to use it in means that are allowed for me to do so. A leasing contract, when I let a house or an apartment, it allows me to utilize the benefits of that property. So what is the marriage contract all about? It's a very thick and strong bond, as Allah described it in the Qur'an, between a man and a woman, which entitles both of them to enjoy one another in an intimate way that it is not possible except through marriage. And with it comes a lot of obligations, responsibilities, and rights, such as inheritance, for example. So one would inherit one another. Without this marriage contract, there won't be such a right, among other things. Now, the usual way of studying such a thing, and the norm among the jurors and the scholars, is that when they mention a topic, they tell you that this topic was based upon the Qur'an, the Sunnah, the consensus of scholars, and logic. This is the usual. So whenever they would like to, for example, talk about prayers, so they say the prayers were mentioned in the Qur'an. Allah says so and so. And in the authentic hadith Ibn Umar, may Allah be pleased with him, the Prophet said that Islam was based or built on 5 pillars. Among them is to establish salat. And the consensus of scholars as well, and logic. Sometimes there are things that we can justify through logic, and sometimes we can't. But these are the trend, this is the norm that jurors use when they speak about such issues. And marriage is not anything different than that. So in the Quran, the marriage was mentioned, and Allah says in the Quran, then marry those that please you of other women, 2 or 3 or 4. But if you fear that you will not be just, then marry only one. And Allah also says, marry the single from among you as well as such of your male and female slaves as are virtuous. So Allah Azza wa Jal is encouraging the Muslims to get married if they're single, and even if they have slaves, women or men, they should also get them married, because this is a natural human trait that men and women, as human beings, they need to fulfill their sexual desires in a halal way. The Prophet also mentioned this, alayhi salatu wasalam, in a very famous hadith, where he said, alayhi salatu wasalam, young men, whoever of you can afford marriage should get married. So this is an instruction from the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. He then goes to say, it helps you lower your gaze and maintain your chastity. And these are the benefits of marriage. Those of you who cannot afford it may resort to voluntary fasting, for fasting serves as protection from sin. So the hadith is crystal clear. And also the Prophet said in another hadith, alayhi salatu wasalam, marry a woman who is loving and can give you children. I shall be taking pride in your numbers on the day of judgment. So this is one of the reasons why marriage is recommended, so that people would have offspring which would allow the Prophet ﷺ on the day of judgment to boast other messengers of the number of followers he has. And we, inshaAllah, would be the vast majority of the population in paradise with the grace of Allah Azza wa Jal. As for the consensus, all Muslim scholars agree that marriage is lawful and that it is a part of the religion which Allah has encouraged us to follow and pursue. Now, the author of the book compiled a number of reasons that are logical, that proves that marriage is lawful. So through logic you can tell, and this does not only restrict to the Muslims, but even the non-Muslims would agree with that. For example, marriage maintains one's chastity. So people who do not have a wife, they are usually susceptible to the whispers of shaitan, encouraging them to do haram things, to fall into haram relationships. And this not necessarily taking place immediately, rather the steps of shaitan are well known. So a photograph, a video clip, a song that softens his heart to sin, feelings of depression and loneliness, having a strong sexual drive, encouraging the person to mix with the opposite gender, to chit chat, to flex his ability to be charming or to be flirtatious, and likewise with women. This is how shaitan works. So by getting married, you would have deprived shaitan from a main source of sin, because a bachelor, a person who's unmarried, is more inclined to sin by 80% than a married person, because a married person is usually satisfied. Maybe there is this 20% evil in him that encourages him to look for something else, but this usually fades away with a number of factors such as fearing Allah Azza wa Jal, the environment, the society, the fear of being exposed, and due to the fact that he has something halal within his reach that would save him from hellfire. Number two, the establishment of congenial relationship between man and wife that gives them both comfort and a settled home. And this is mentioned clearly in the Qur'an. Allah mentions that among his signs that he had created from our own selves, meaning from Adam. As we know that Hawa or Eve was created from Adam's rib. So whenever you see that women are created from men, this is not referring to all women created from us. Rather, it is referring to Eve or Hawa being created from the rib of Adam. So Allah says that among his signs that he created from our own self, spouses, so that we would be inclined to, we would have tranquility towards them. And he made among them affection and compassion and mercy. So this is indeed one of the blessings of Allah Azza wa Jal upon mankind. Life is lonely as it is, and without a spouse, it is a prison cell. Once a person is married, as in the authentic hadith, he has fulfilled half of his iman. He should fear Allah in the second half. So it is a fulfillment of religion to be married, and you would have satisfaction, if not all the time, the majority of the time. And don't always be pessimistic, saying that, oh, I've seen so many married couple having fights and having this. No, this is all nonsense. The vast majority of married couple are happy. Look at your parents, look at your uncles and aunts, look at your siblings, look at your neighbors. Rarely you will find someone complaining or divorcing or having a fight, as the norm is that people live together and cope with one another. Number three, maintaining proper lineage between parents and offspring, and close relationships with relatives and in-laws. And indeed, Allah mentioned in Surah Al-Hujurat that Allah has made us from a man and a woman, from a male and a female. And he made us nations and tribes so that we would know one another. Marriage is one of the means of having in-laws, which is a great benefit, especially to those who are married and know that their in-laws become means of support for him. And this is the norm. Unlike those who do not protect their lineage, like so many celebrities in the non-Muslim world, where they have 3 or 4 children from their partner without ever being properly married. And they claim that they are their children, but we don't know. Only the mother can say that this is my child because she gave birth to it. But who was the father? It could have been him, it could have been someone else, because there is no limitation to the amount of cheating they can do. And they're not man and wife. So one day he's mad with her, he leaves the house for a week, no strings attached, he does whatever he wants to do, and she thinks, well, he's not my husband, I can do whatever I want to do. And subhanAllah, they become like animals. And this is where they have the terminology, a one-night stand. And then after a week, they get back together and they live together. 9 months later, she has a child. Is it his? No one knows. But who cares? They don't have any respect or regard to religion. This is why they're living in fornication, not fearing Allah, not caring about their children. Islam is a beautiful religion that prevents all of such nonsense. Number 4, the continuity of the human race and the steady increase of the Muslim population so that they may advocate the divine faith. And this is a well-known fact that, alhamdulillah, marriage is means of continuation of the human race. We've seen many countries in Europe suffering because they don't have any children, and the rate of youth is far, far less than the rate of the elders. So it's becoming nations of the elders. And this is why they're now opening the door for immigration. They need those people from the third world countries whom they used to fight their quote-unquote occupation of their lands in the past years. Now they are urging them to come so that they can maintain the power of their countries, or let us say rebuild what's need to be rebuilding. We've seen how many European countries opened their doors for the Syrian refugees who crossed the Mediterranean, not because they love humanity or the Syrians, but because their population is becoming less and less. And all that might, power, industry, economy would go down the drain if you don't have workers to execute your strategies and plans. And finally, safeguarding morality so that people do not sink into adulterous relationships. And by far, this is one of the greatest benefits of marriage. And we see how people tend to sink down the drain when it comes to moralities, when it comes to ethics and moral conduct. In the United States, it is very normal to find a 13-year-old girl pregnant, and the boyfriend, it does not want anything to do with it. They're having illicit relationships from a very early age because there is no marriage constitution. When you tell the boy or the girl to only marry after reaching 18, this is a deficiency in human intellect, because such couple reach puberty way earlier than that. And with the media, the movies, the music, the billboards, the nudity that you see in front of you, you can't expect people to not fall into sin. The only escape is the marriage, the constitution of marriage. You get them married, and you will find that the crime rate, that the depression rate, that birth out of wedlock, and all of these heinous things have diminished, if not evaporated into thin air. But this is what happens when you go against and out of the Sharia of Allah Azza wa Jal, the law of Allah. When you act according to human laws and regulations, this is the natural resort. So, how to get married? Let's get to the serious stuff. I'm interested in marrying a woman. How would I go about doing it? The most famous way of doing it in other countries is dating. So, this is what happens in the modernized world. You see a girl, you like her. She might be in your school, in your college. She might be a co-worker. She might be working in a shop. And you start to flirt. And you start to make a pass. It's like fishing. 9 out of 10 times, the fish will get the bait and run away, leaving you without anything. But there's this one time that it will catch the bait and the hook. So this is what's happening in non-Muslim countries, and unfortunately also in some Muslim countries where Muslims are not real Muslims but only Muslims by an ID card. In Islam, free mixing is prohibited. Looking at a girl without lowering your gaze is prohibited. Chit-chatting is prohibited. Segregation is mandatory. So the means of falling into sin are very limited, if any at all. And therefore, chastity is preserved. And usually, the normal way of getting in contact to establish a marriage would be the traditional way, which a lot of the societies look down upon. Traditional way. Why? They want to allow themselves and their friends and brothers the option of getting a test drive and to humiliate a woman and to use her and dump her. This is why they don't like the traditional way. This is why they promote mixing and free mixing and mingling in schools and universities and in offices and workplaces. Why? Because this is what Shaitan wants. And people are often blinded by the light. They don't see it, although it's right in front of them. And usually, they don't see it when it's related to them. So I get so many questions. Sheikh, can I have a friend from the opposite gender? Nothing sexual, but we chit-chat, we talk, sometimes we hold hands, and we like one another. So is that permissible? Someone goes the extra mile and says that she comes in, and this happens a lot in countries like Africa, and I get questions from there. A girl comes to my home, she cleans and she cooks for me, and we spend nights together. We're not married, and some of them say we're not even interested in getting married, but this relationship is convenient for both of us. Subhanallah, what religion is this? So they are interested in a test drive. I had a friend 20 years ago. He's Christian, and we used to work out in the gym. So I used to give him da'wah, try to, little bit by bit. And once I asked him, I said, Rick, when are you going to get married? And he's like in his mid-30s, almost. He said, no, still too early for me. I'm still looking for the right woman. I said, Subhanallah, and you haven't found her yet? She said, no. So I said, okay, how many women did you look into? So if I were to say, where's your black book? We have all the names and dates. And he laughed. And he said, there's so many of them, I don't know. So I said, and do you think after trying all these women that you will ever find a woman that would satisfy you? This is impossible. Therefore, Islam puts us on a leash. It controls our desires, especially when they're wild. It governs our desires. It is not like other religions that prevent you from even desiring and prohibits something that is natural, such as marriage, and tells you, no, you want to become pure, you must become celibate and not get married at all. Islam is not like that. And it's also not like being a dog that wiggles his tails running from one place to the other. Islam says that you get the chance to get married. So as a Muslim, there are a number of things that you should follow. One of them is engagement. So what is engagement? In other religions, engagement is camouflaging zina. So if a person is engaged to a woman, he can be engaged to her for 6-7 years. They go out, they live together, they sleep together, and everyone knows that they're engaged. This can go for years, this can go for a week or two, and then they broke their engagement. No, this is zina. This is not Islamic engagement. Al-khitbah, or the proper engagement, is to propose to the family you're interested in getting married. Now, I know how people think. Sheikh, if I don't know the girl, how can I propose to her? Knowing her through dating is haram. Knowing her through a couple of weeks of chit-chatting on the phone is haram. Because we have to protect both men and women from temptations of shaitan. So the proper way, the traditional way, is that your sister comes to you and says, listen, if you're interested in getting married, I have a friend, or I know a cousin, or there is this girl I saw that fits your qualifications and fits your desires. He says, I don't like tall women. I want her to be 4'8". I don't like women with blonde hair, or I want a woman with a blonde hair. I don't want her to be a PhD holder. A bachelor degree would do. I want this and I want that. She has to love the things that I love. I don't like her to be so open without wearing any hijab, mixing with her cousins. And at the same time, I don't want her to be this or that. So you give your specifications. Your sister, your mother, your aunt comes, one of your mahram says, we found a girl. And they tell you about her. You like what you hear. Now you want to ask. So you ask around and you get positive vibes. Alhamdulillah, you go and propose. Usually, in so many countries, they first dispatch the mother and the sister. So I would send my mother and sister to meet the girl and her parent and her mother. And they go and they meet and they see firsthand, they ask, they chit chat for an hour or two, maybe have a small meal. They get to know their first impression about the girl. They come back and tell me, Wallah, she said this, she said that, the way she laughs, she's so kind, she is so hospitable, generous, etc. And this adds to your liking. And they have no problem in you proposing. So you get your gear together and you go to meet her father. Her father meets you, sits with you, interviews you, asks around your workplace, your neighborhood, your masjid, and everything is positive. He designates a certain day, you go and you meet him again, but this time the girl comes into the interview and she sits with you and with her father for an hour or two. You look at her, whether she's wearing the hijab or not, but you take a good look at her face, at her body, at her height. Of course, she's not going to strip for you. She's not going to wear any makeup. And she looks at you and she sees how tall and handsome, ugly you are. And you guys exchange a dialogue and you talk and you get to know one another's personality from this first impression. After everything is done, you've asked her everything you wanted to ask. She asked you who are the sheikhs you are listening to so that she could identify your manhaj and knows your aqidah and knows how committed you are to Islam or not at all. Then you depart. In the evening, usually, the mother takes the okay from you. She calls her mother and she says, Wallah, alhamdulillah, we like what we had seen and we hope to hear something from you. And the girl thinks it over, prays istikhara, checks it with her parents, with her siblings, and if she's okay and comfortable with it, she gives the green light and the mother calls her, your mother, saying that alhamdulillah, we liked what we'd seen. You guys agree on an engagement date. An engagement takes place, segregated, men with the men, women with the women. She's not your wife yet, so she's a non-mahram to you. No communication, no mixing or seeing one another. This is called engagement. So when a proposal is accepted, number one, no other man may make a proposal. So now it is official. She is engaged to me, but she's not my mahram, I'm not her mahram. Which means that no one else can come and propose to this girl, knowing that I have proposed to her and they have accepted. This is totally prohibited. The Prophet ﷺ prohibited selling over one's transaction. Me and Ahmed, I sold him my pen and he bought it. Another person comes and says, why did you sell it for this much? I would have bought it for a much higher price. So now he's cutting in. This is haram. Likewise, if he comes and proposes to the girl's family, knowing that I have already proposed and they've accepted my proposal. So this is totally haram. The Prophet says, let no man make a proposal when his brother has made one until the first one has either married the woman or abandoned his proposal. So you cannot make a move until I get married. Then this is an ended issue, or they reject my proposal or I reject that. Number two, it is forbidden to make a direct expression of one's desire to a widowed woman. So engagement, though it is not a contract, when a woman is a widow and she is in her waiting period of 4 months and 10 days, I cannot propose, Sheikh, her husband is dead. Yes, but she's mourning him for 4 months and 10 days, where she's not allowed to wear any makeup, wear anything glamorous in terms of dresses, or putting perfume, or beautifying herself in any means for these whole 4 months and 10 days. So to go and directly propose is totally prohibited. Allah Azza wa Jal says in the Qur'an, you will incur no sin if you give a hint of marriage offered to a widowed woman. So hinting is okay. Directly approaching a widow saying that I'm interested in getting married to you the moment you finish your iddah is totally prohibited. So what is meant by hinting? It says that, for example, I hope that Allah facilitates for me a marriage to a good woman. This is a hint. This is not a direct attempt to propose. So hinting to a widow is permissible. But if a woman was divorced, the first or the second divorce, and she is in her iddah period, which is marked by 3 monthly cycles. So I know that this woman had a fight with her husband, he divorced her for the first time, and he left the house. My mother goes to her and says, listen, when is your iddah period over from this divorce? She says, after a month and a half. So my mom says, okay, listen, if it's over and your husband does not reconcile with you, we'll propose to your parents for my son. This is totally prohibited, whether it's direct or a hint, because throughout the iddah period, she is still classified as a wife of that person who divorced her. And if any one of them dies, he will inherit, she will be inherited by the other one, because they are in the iddah period and they're still the lawful spouse. Number 3, we've mentioned this so many times, and we stated that such an engagement is not a marriage. So just because you're engaged does not mean that you can have an engagement party and you put the ring into your future wife's hand, or touch her, or mix with her. In some Muslim countries, unfortunately, and I've seen this myself, a woman is engaged to her fiance for a year. They go out together, they even go to the movies together. And Allah knows, when she's 3-4 hours out of the house with her fiance, how chaste they will be. No one knows if they went to a hotel room or to the movies. And after a year, they break up. The woman is devastated because what had happened had happened. The man is just a dog, moves to another, you know what. So Islam protects the society, the community, the Muslims from any such filth, so that everything goes according to Allah's plan. I think we will stop here and take your questions. And we have many of them, but we will see what happens, inshallah. Khalid says, our masjid is opened, alhamdulillah, a week ago, but the procedure is to space 2 meters, and I don't feel comfortable praying so. And we don't know up to when. Only Allah knows. The situation will be back to pray all next to each other. Am I sinning for praying at home? Wallahi, Khalid, this is an issue of great confusion. On one hand, we know that the medical professionals recommend this. And we know that this is trying to save the community from the outbreak of such a vicious virus. Unfortunately, this is not always the case, because we see that in malls, in shops, in restaurants, in the souk, everywhere else, you find that people are not committed to that social distancing, as they call it, but only in the masjids. Subhanallah. And in the beginning, I kept on repeating that as long as there are no fatwas from the unified fatwa from the major scholars, then this is an issue of dispute. I personally don't like this. I tried it for one day and found that with the mask and with the meters apart from the worshippers, and with the obligation of getting your own prayer mat and not staying after the salat except for 5 minutes in the masjid, I found that this to me was very irritating. Even with the mask, I'm unable to recite silently because something I'm not used to it. So Alhamdulillah, those who are comfortable in going to the masjid and find that the pros are far greater than the cons in attending the prayer in the masjid, they may do so. And they have great scholars who approve such a format in prayer, such as Sheikh Sa'd al-Shithri, Turki al-Khathlan, Abd al-Karim al-Khadir, also Abd al-Rahman al-Barrak, and others. Those who do not feel good about it and they are too distracted, I'm not talking about people who are afraid of getting this virus. I'm talking about people who believe that this is an innovation, this is not how it should be done, especially that the risk is not that serious. It's not a pandemic such as the plague or something that is deadly, like I think they call it smallpox. Is it? I don't know. Something that was eradicated long ago, but still has influence, and it's fatal. It kills people. This is not like that. So this is up to you, and Allah knows best. Abu Nur Hana, during Salat, last sujood, either fard or sunnah, is it permissible to make dua in sujood in my own language after saying Subhanaka Rabbi al-A'la, Subhana Rabbi al-A'la wa bihamdih? Please advise. The answer is yes. In sujood, whether it is the last sujood or the first sujood, it doesn't make any difference, because there's no preference to the last sujood. It's the same like any other sujood. So if you do throughout the whole prayer, whether fard or sunnah, throughout the whole sujoods, whether the first or the last, you make your own dua, this is permissible, providing you do not know how to say it in Arabic. So for example, if I want to say, oh Allah, cure my ill patients, Allahumma shfi mardana, I know how to say it in Arabic, so I have to say it in Arabic. But if I want to ask Allah to guide my wife to becoming a full hijabi, practicing woman, and I don't know how to say that in Arabic, so there's no problem in saying it in English at all, and Allah knows best. His second question, Abu Nur Hana, upon completing reading the Qur'an, is there a particular standard dua? There is not a standard prescribed dua after reciting the Qur'an. So you don't say Sadaqallahu al-Azim and you don't supplicate long du'as. You just simply finish reciting it and move on. Lamin Barrow says it's not permissible to pray in a masjid where there's a grave. Please could you tell us how our beloved Prophet's grave sallallahu alaihi wasallam came part of the Masjid al-Nabawi? This incident took place way after the 4 righteous caliphs. It took place on the year of, I think, 88 Hijrah, which is about 9 decades after Hijrah. And it was introduced to the masjid by the caliph at the time, Al-Walid ibn Abdul Malik. And we know that he wanted to expand the masjid, so he instructed the Amir of Medina at the time, surprisingly was Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, the great caliph to become a caliph later on. He instructed him to demolish the houses of the wives of the Prophet ﷺ and to expand the masjid further south. And Umar, who was a scholar himself, was shocked. So he summoned all the tabi'een and the scholars of Medina, and he asked them about their recommendation, and all of them unanimously said no, this is not permissible, it's haram. And the Prophet ﷺ prohibited from doing this because this is the doing of the Jews and the Christians, and he cursed the Jews and the Christians for taking the graves of their prophets and messengers as places of worship. And he said that they're the most evil of people on earth. So Umar wrote back to Al-Walid ibn Abdul Malik telling him that this is not possible and this is not permissible, and all the scholars of Islam said so. Only to be surprised that Al-Walid sent him a direct instruction and order, do as I say. Umar was helpless. He could not do anything but execute the instruction of the Khalifa. And the house of Aisha was included in the masjid. Why do I emphasize the house of Aisha? Because the Prophet ﷺ was buried in Aisha's house. So for about 70 plus years, the masjid was separated from the house of Aisha, which had the grave of the Prophet ﷺ, and then the grave of Abu Bakr, and then the grave of Umar, all together in the house of Aisha. And the masjid was something else. Therefore, when they expanded the masjid, they included the house, not the graves. So the graves were never intended. They just wanted to include the house, not thinking of the consequences. And after that, no one dared to demolish the area of the masjid and have the house outside as it used to be. Why? Because every ruler who came afterwards was afraid, because they knew that any such act would provoke the ignorant Muslims worldwide, and it would have negative and bad consequences. In Islam, we judge things by their consequences, and this is why it was never done. Even the Prophet ﷺ had done something similar to that when he sallallahu alaihi wasallam was talking to Mother Aisha, telling her, had it not been your people were so close just recently, idol worshippers, had it not been for this fact, I would have demolished the Kaaba. and I would have rebuilt it on the foundations of Ibrahim, because the Kaaba at the moment is not built on the foundations of Ibrahim. And this might be a surprise to some of you. You see the Kaaba, the black structure. Next to it, there's something like an ark. Ark maybe is not the right word. An arch. And this is called Hijru Ismail. People go round the Kaaba and this arch. Though there's an opening inside, nobody goes from inside, because this is part of the Kaaba. And when the Kaaba was demolished due to some floods and the Arabs tried to rebuild it, they got short of funds. So they built only this structure, leaving out that area. So the Prophet said to Mother Aisha, had not your people been so recent to worshipping idols, I would have demolished the Kaaba, rebuilt it on the foundations of Ibrahim, and had 2 doors to it, one for people to enter from and the other for people to exit from. Why didn't the Prophet do this, ﷺ? Because he feared that Shaitan would manipulate people's heads and get them to leave Islam and go back to idol worshipping. Decades later, Abdullah ibn Zubair, may Allah be pleased with him and with his father, took rule of Mecca, Medina, and Hijaz in total. So he's, by the way, the son of Zubair ibn Awam, one of the 10 heaven bound. His mother is Asma bint Abi Bakr. So you know how close he is to the Prophet and to the Muslims. When he reigned over Mecca, he demolished the Kaaba and rebuilt it as the Prophet wanted to do that, alayhi salam. And they remained having it like this for some time, until he was killed. May Allah be pleased with him. And then Hajjaj ibn Yusuf al-Thaqafi and Banu Umayyah demolished the Kaaba once again and rebuilt it as it used to be, which is as it is today. Few years later, one of the caliphs wanted to rebuild it as of the wish of the Prophet ﷺ, and as Abdullah ibn Zubair did. But I think it was Malik ibn Anas, Imam Malik, or someone else who said, please don't. So he said, why? Wasn't this the wish of the Prophet ﷺ? And this scholar said, yes, it was. But I'm afraid that people would take Kaaba as a form of a game. They demolish it when they want, and they rebuild it whenever they want. So every time a new king or a new Khalifa comes, he does what the opposite of what his predecessor had done. And this is degrading of the Kaaba. So it was left till date. So this is why we have the grave of the Prophet ﷺ included in the boundaries of the masjid, because it wasn't the masjid then, and the grave of the Prophet ﷺ was not a particular or an individual grave. It was buried, or he was buried ﷺ in his house, the house of Aisha, and Allah Azza wa Jal knows best. So Tazreen says, since the condition for a trade being valid is the person being an adult, what about children buying from stores? This is an issue of dispute among scholars. The vast majority say that it is prohibited for children to buy and sell. And some of them say if the child is rational and knows, then this is permissible, providing his guardian allows it. So if I tell my son, take 5 riyals and go buy some bread for me, this is permissible because I authorize them. Other scholars said, how would the seller know that this child was authorized? So again, it's an issue of confusion. However, Scholars say that, the majority of them say that, as long as what is being purchased is negligible, like candies, like soft drink, like some bread, then there's no problem in doing that. But to fill up a shopping cart with groceries of $200 or $300, no, this is not permissible at all. Jamila says, if you live in the West, is it to take a mortgage? Because it's only way to buy your own place. Also, people say it's okay to have mortgage if you live in the house and it's the only one. Mortgage is a riba-based loan. It is an interest-based loan. So actually they are lending you an X amount of money where you are obliged to pay them Y amount of interest, riba. And this is totally prohibited. Now people try to justify it by saying that this is a non-Muslim country, so you are actually dealing with kafir. And this is not a legitimate justification. It's like saying, oh, going on a date with a kafir woman is okay because she's kafir. So even if we have intimacy, that's okay. No, it's not okay. It's a major sin. It's zina. And riba is the same thing. Whether the person you're borrowing or lending is a believer or a non-believer, it doesn't make any difference at all. Transgression is there. You can easily rent. Oh yes, Sheikh, but this would be wasting a lot of money when we pay rent. After 20 years, we could have bought the house. It's true, but you didn't have the money. Yeah, so we bought it through mortgage. So in order to justify buying in riba, is that you don't want to pay rent for 20 years? This is not logical. At the sight of Allah, it is best for you to pay rent for the rest of your life rather than to pay 1 penny in riba. Renting is halal. Riba is totally prohibited in Islam, and Allah Azza wa Jal knows best. Iqbal Ahmed says, can we pray salah holding the Qur'an on hand and reciting the surah? Well, the scholars say that this is permissible in voluntary prayers. So if you hold the Qur'an in Taraweeh, in Tahajjud, and you read from it, there's no problem in that at all. But when it comes to fard prayer, the 5 daily prayers, they prevent this. And they say that it includes movement that is uncalled for. Why would I read it from the Mus'haf? I can read any short surah from my own head, and that would be more than sufficient, and Allah Azza wa Jal knows best. Fatih says, if a woman has irregular periods, must she maintain this to a man? Must she mention this to a man who's proposing to marry her? The answer is yes. Scholars say that any defect, anything that is negative in a potential spouse that may repel or cause the resentment of the spouse to the other one must be revealed. So sometimes I may have an issue which is not that repelling. I have a birthmark on my hand. Do I have to tell people about it? No, I don't have to. Because this is not something that would cause a potential spouse to resent. But if a person has an odor in his mouth that is so repulsive, so bad, but he tries to hide it, and it's chronic, if you're proposing, it is mandatory upon you to disclose this, because most people would not sit next to you, let alone get married to you. So this is something you have to say, disclose. If a girl had, I don't know what's called in English, disectomy maybe, she cannot bear children, and nobody knows. When a potential suitor proposes, her guardian must tell him that there's no possibility of her bearing children. Likewise, if a girl has irregular period known as istihada, so this is continuous bleeding, though she can pray and fast and he may have intimacy with, the vast majority of men would not like this. So this would be a sort of cheating, not telling him. So her guardian has to tell him this, providing that this is chronic and uncurable. But if it is something that is normal, all doctors say that if you take this medication, it will stop in like a couple of months. So it's a normal thing that can be treated. In this case, there's no need to tell him, because by the time the marriage takes place, they would have been cured bi'idhnillahi azza wa jal. So this is all the time we have until we meet you next Thursday, inshallah. I'll leave you fi amanillah. Stay safe. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.